Probably our biggest success, Dr. Rath, in recent times on YouTube has been the now famous speech you gave in Berlin in March 2012. So far, over 1.25 million people have actually watched this speech on our YouTube channel. And we know from the emails and communications we receive via our websites that this speech touched a lot of people in a lot of countries all over the world. A lot has happened since you gave that speech, and perhaps we should talk about this as a means of bringing people up to speed on why these things have happened since that time, March 2012, and how these things have happened.
Yeah, maybe I go briefly back to my personal explanation why this speech was perceived as genuine and touched the hearts, as you said. I think it was because I made clear where I'm coming from, that my father was fighting on the wrong side in a war, an unjust war, launched by cartel interests. My grandfather was fighting in a war, the First World War, on the wrong side, in an unjust war that killed many innocent people all over Europe. And I was the first generation privileged to look behind the curtain. Who were the economic interests that brought my family way back into this situation? And I pledged to change that. I pledged not to fight in a war, but to fight that the next generations understand the driving forces of these wars, of the current situation, of the economic background of the Brussels EU, and their efforts to control the world.
Of course.
Now, as to your point that many things happened in the meantime, I think the message that the two world wars were not events that just dropped from heaven reached the four corners of the world. IG Farben, the cartel interests behind those terrible events, is about to become mainstream, is about to enter the history books. 7 decades after the last event, it's about time. There are, of course, also things that happened right in Germany. The elections of the German parliament and Angela Merkel being re-elected as the head of the German government. But we also have to understand, while everyone was praising the elections of Angela, the greatest party voted during these elections were the non-voters. The people refused to vote for any party because they are confused, some of them disgusted by the options they had, meaning voting for the cartel as a black or a red or a yellow political person. In any case, you voted for the cartel and for their rule in Brussels. And people sensed that. So the second biggest surprise during those elections in September in Germany was that the anti-Brussels party got almost 5% of the votes and almost made it into parliament.
Right.
Taking that together, that hooray that is being orchestrated by the media around Angela is just another step of deception.
Of course.
And we need to understand this. The people of Europe need to understand that. We need to see that this is not a sign of strength that is happening currently. It's a sign of people all over Europe are waking up. And that whole fairy tale that the people of Germany are actually benefiting from what's going on is also becoming transparent to more and more people. There are many communities in Germany that are going bankrupt as we speak. It's actually, the number is exponentially rising. There are broadcasting shows on national TV about impoverishment of the elderly in Germany. So the problems we see all over Europe do not exclude Germany. We are all, the people of Europe, we are all in the same boat. It's us against them, the cartel interests. And it's time for us to develop counter strategies to take this situation and develop it into a future that has a perspective, especially for the young generation.
This is important, isn't it? Because the problems you touched on there in Germany, the economic problems, the problems that people face in their everyday lives, these are being mirrored all over Europe, and particularly in the southern Mediterranean countries. The unemployment situation is becoming extreme. So looking at that level, I guess we need to talk about what people need to do in order to help rechart a course back to where we need to be, towards the Europe that we all deserve in terms of our human rights. Clearly, the way people are voting and the way people are being forced to live now would not be the way they would choose to live. It's the choices they are faced with in elections are not the choices they would want to be faced with. So that we have to ask the question, I guess, what do people need to do? What action should people be taking right now?
Well, to answer that question, we need to be analytical. We need to first look at by which means is the cartel trying to control society and conquer the world. Mm-hmm. And the way they do that is by picking out key sectors of society that are economically, politically and socially relevant. Mm-hmm. One of them is health. Through the pharmaceutical industry, create a monopoly on health. Energy, through the petrochemical and nuclear industry, control that aspect of our life. Especially economic. Food is a third important area where they try to control not just what we eat, but also build up the possibility to use hunger as a potential tool to control a revolting population through introducing GMO food in a broader and broader scale. If you control food supply, you control the people. If we analyze this strategy, which is by now transparent to broad public, then we get the best guidance of where we need to go. If we want to change something, we need to create the alternatives to their plan. We need to educate our fellow citizens about the strategy and about the alternatives. If we do that, we have a chance to create economic alternatives. We have a chance to reduce their economic sources of building this global dictatorship by replacing their outdated technologies with modern technologies, energies, renewable energies, instead of dependency, the tyranny of oil, as some politicians call it. Food, sustainable, organically grown food, as opposed to dependency through patented, genetically modified food. And of course, the area of health, where it's now becoming abundantly evident that natural molecules grown in the plants of our planet have the power to prevent and in many cases cure the most dramatic diseases, as opposed to patented chemicals that maintain those diseases as markets.
So, as a means of focusing these issues, in 2007, survivors of Auschwitz drafted a constitution for Europe at a meeting with our foundation in Auschwitz, in fact. And this constitution is the object, the focus of a petition, isn't it, that we've had running for a few years now. This is something through which people can register their support for this alternative vision for Europe, a Europe, as we call it, for the people, by the people, and a Europe in which patents on health, life and food would be outlawed, and these things would be organised in the interests of the people. This is something that we want people to support. This is something through which people can show their support for the vision of Europe that was put to us by survivors of Auschwitz in 2007, isn't it?
Of course, and we perhaps need to briefly address the aspect why Auschwitz.
Sure, absolutely, a big one.
That is not a coincidence that we had this meeting in Auschwitz and that the survivors actually gave us this award, Relay of Life award, asking our foundation to continue their message that events like Auschwitz should never happen again. We, of course, looked at Auschwitz and we saw that the terrible death camp of Auschwitz was not an isolated aspect. It was built 7 miles away from the largest chemical plant at that time, owned 100% by the German cartel IG Farben. And many of the survivors worked there as slave laborers. Of course, the great majority was killed during that time. So Auschwitz for us is a symbol of the real face of the cartel. Death, disease, human sacrifice for profit. And that's the reason why Auschwitz has this symbol for today, that if we want to prevent world wars to haunt mankind again, we need to go and analyze the economic basis of wars. We need to talk about it. And Auschwitz and the survivors of Auschwitz gave us, they knighted us that we should go on and carry that message. And when they drafted that document for a new Europe, that they focused on those key elements, the right to health, the right to life, the right to food, it was no coincidence either, because, as we explained before, these are the areas that the cartel needs to maintain its power. So, if we want to carry on the heritage of the survivors of Auschwitz, we need to tell you that. We need to draw your attention to those economic backgrounds of wars. And we need to urge you to familiarize yourself with this understanding, because you can't find it in the textbooks of history or in any school textbooks about your country or about Second World War. Why is that? Because we are dealing with masters of deception. How many billions of dollars or euros do you think had to be spent for the last 7 decades to just keep the true nature of these world wars? Meaning wars of conquest for the cartel, out of the history books. And who do you think paid this money? To the media, to the universities of history and the other sectors, to society at large. Of course, the very same interests that knew if that information comes out, they could never again try another attempt at the conquest of Europe and the world. So this deceiving you, deceiving the world about the true nature of the First and Second World War was a precondition for what they're now trying to do with Brussels. So if you are living in Europe, yes, you absolutely need to support this call for a new base, for New Europe. And if you live outside, you need to understand the role of Europe in trying to conquer the entire world through the influence on Africa, through the African Union, through the so-called free trade negotiations with the United States of America. Don't be fooled by free trade. The goal of these negotiations is for the cartel, meaning in this case the German, the British, the French oil and drug cartel, to get direct access to the White House. So if you're watching this movie in the United States, you should vehemently oppose any negotiations on free trade between these two countries. Because if you don't, in 5 years down the road, you can vote whatever president you want, whatever party he belongs to. The executive commands for society in the US will be drawn by the very same forces that were behind World War I and World War II. And you can do nothing about it. So there's a very strong message right now, right at this moment in history, that we need to help communicate to our fellow citizens.
What was clear, Dr. Rath, from what you just said, is that this is not just a European problem. The dictatorship and the loss of human rights that is taking place in Europe right now is something that, if not stopped, will ultimately threaten the entire world. I think perhaps then, to close here, what we need to perhaps talk about is the movement of life and how this fits into this understanding and how it fits into the perspective of what people can do to help bring about a positive change to this situation. The call for a movement of life, again, was initiated by the survivors of Auschwitz, of course, wasn't it? So we've talked about what people in Europe can do and the importance of them supporting the Constitution and the petition for this. People globally, if they live in Pakistan, if they live in Australia or the United States, what can they do? And how can they do that through the movement of life?
Well, you're absolutely right on that, Paul. It's no longer a national or even a continental-wide mission. It is a global mission. It's them against us.
Absolutely.
It's these interests against all future generations.
The people.
And the sooner we accept that fact, the better it is for mankind. Movement of Life was the response to the Relay of Life award we got from the survivors of Auschwitz. It was a logical consequence of this award. If you get that award from the people who lived through hell on earth, and Auschwitz was nothing else, you cannot put that award in your shelf and admire it. You got one of the most prestigious and responsible awards there is on this planet. And so consequently we see ourselves, our foundation, who got that award, as the carrier of this mission, as a propeller. And there are so many social movements that you can join on the internet, but if you watch carefully, hardly anyone addresses the aspects of control of the key sectors of society, like energy, like health, like food. Why is that? Well, the first answer is these movements may actually be launched by the cartel itself, just to confuse you, just to distract from what they're really doing, to pretend that you do something socially active, but you may be sidetracked. So the Movement of Life, from this analysis that we talked about, has very sharp goals. We need to replace the economic basis in those areas of control, economic, political and social control, by the cartel. Health, food, nutrition, energy. By doing that, we need to create jobs, and we can create jobs because the technologies are available and can be used decentralized, can be developed. So Movement of Life is a clearinghouse for ideas in these key areas, with the goal to develop these alternatives. By the way, if you are interested to preserve democracy on this planet and in your country, you better get active. For if you don't, the cartel will go on. Their goal is dictatorship, as we now see it in Brussels, and as we will soon see it in other areas of the world if we don't stop them. Our goal is to preserve democracy in your country, in the world, for this generation and for future generations. That's the goal of the Movement of Life, and we need you.
Beneath this video, there's a box that's labelled About, and in that box you will find links to some of the things that we've been talking about today. Click on those links, share them with people. If you live in Europe, sign the Constitution petition. If you live elsewhere or anywhere, support the call for movement of life. Because Dr. Rath says, whatever you do, you must take action, because it's your future, our future, and the future of our children that we're talking about here.
Very true.